At this time, our children age 3 through grade 3 can meet Miss Michelle, their teacher, at the back for Kingdom Kids. Don't all run at once. So just a reminder, we are preaching through the book of Mark this summer. And while Pastor Jim normally does the bulk of the preaching, myself, Mike, and James, who's on vacation this week, are pitching in a little bit and working through the book of Mark together and sharing some weeks of preaching. So if today's not your style, stick around for Pastor Jim. We've been so accustomed to having a bulletin, an outline that has the Bible passage that we're studying through with us, but we're also taking a break from that this summer and trying to get back to opening up the Bible or your phone. I'm old enough at this point. We used to have Bible drills, or I think that's what they're called, Bible drills, where someone would say a passage and you had to quick look it up in the Bible. So you can do that still. Or the phone is also an easy option. Just ask Siri for it and it comes up much quicker. So we're going to be in Mark chapter 4 today, and we're going to start in verse 35. There's tons of Bibles on the back table as well if you'd like one. And if you are using one of those Bibles, we're going to start on page 998. So Mark chapter 4, and we're going to start in verse 35. Do we have any sports fans here? A few. I know a few. Maybe not all. Do you know what a victory formation is?
When they win?
Yeah. So in sports, a victory formation, when they basically have the victory locked up, they have the win locked up, they use a play to basically end the game. So they run out the clock to preserve the victory. The other team knows they're going to lose. They know they're going to win. So like in football, as an example, the quarterback might take a snap from the offensive line and he'll kneel on the ground. The clock winds down, and the game's over, and they're victorious, right? That team is victorious. Now, just because the team that has the ball and is winning wants to run the clock out, and they know they're going to win, the other team doesn't always play by the rules. So even though victory is secured, and they know they're victorious, the other team might jump the line, might play a little rough, there might be some pushing and shoving, some non-church words used probably. So the other team doesn't have to concede victory, although they know the other team will be victorious. In this section of Mark, we maintain the theme of Jesus being a servant, but we focus on him being a conqueror, being victorious. Now we're gonna hit on 4 key themes: victory over danger, victory over demons, victory over disease, and victory over death. God's servant, Jesus, is the conqueror of every enemy. And we don't need to be afraid or fear or be on the other side of the victory when we trust and obey him. So Mark recorded 4 miracles, and we're going to go kind of briefly through the 4 miracles. And Jesus performed them, and as was then, even so today, Jesus demonstrated that victory over an enemy. So we're going to start in Mark chapter 4, verse 35, and we'll go to verse 41. On that day, when evening came, he said to them, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him along with them in the boat, just as he was, and other boats were with him. And there arose a fierce gale of wind, and the waves were breaking over the boat so much that the boat was already filling up. Jesus himself was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" And he got up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Hush, be still." And the wind died down, and it became perfectly calm. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They became very much afraid and said to one another, "Who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him?" So this storm was a part of that day's curriculum, that part of the lesson that the disciples had to learn. It says, when we started off the passage, that day when evening came. And it refers to the same day that Jesus was explaining the parables of the kingdom. Mike talked about that last week. So on that same day, when Jesus is explaining these parables to his disciples, his hand-picked guys, he says, "All right, I'm going to give you a test." He was going to give them a practical test after all that he had taught them, and he wanted to see how much they had learned. So Lisa's my daughter, and I know she loves pop quizzes. Every day when I drive her to school, she said, "I don't know, is there going to be a quiz today? Is there not going to be a quiz today?" And that's what Jesus did to these disciples. They probably were long from their school days, and he pop quizzed them on what he had been teaching them earlier in that day. Does he ever do that to us? Probably, right? There's many times we can think of him teaching us a lesson or us studying something, and sure enough, doesn't something related happen to us that day or the next day, and we can recall what we had been taught and what we had been learning. Who likes boats? Any boaters?
Oh, my dad owned a boat.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was fun. He even taught me how to drive it.
Are you a good driver?
No.
I'm sure it's just the boat that you're not the good driver in.
I got land sickness.
Okay.
We went to Virginia and we were on it for like 4 days. So when I got off, I felt like I was still on the boat.
I like boats enough. Nice to be on a boat, but I don't want to be on the boat in a storm. These guys were fishermen, right? Many of the disciples were fishermen, and they were used to boats, right? That's how they made their living before they started to follow Jesus, and even through when they were following Jesus. So they were tough guys. They were tough guys on the boat. And this was a storm that was even enough for them to be scared by. It even said in the text, after Jesus said, "Why are you scared? What are you doing? Why are you afraid? I'm here." It still said, well, they were still scared. So it was a big, frightening storm. But there were 3 good reasons that Jesus showed them why they should not have been scared. Number 1, Jesus promised that they were going over to the other side. He said that in the text. When I grew up, my parents were very, very particular not to promise anything if they knew there was a chance of it not happening. So even though we thought maybe we were going to do something fun, they would never say they were going to do it until the moment before, because they could promise that was going to happen. Jesus promised them that they were getting over to the other side. He had already told them, despite the storm, we're going to the other side. So they should have been confident in that fact. Number 2, Jesus, the Lord himself, was with them. When we were kids, right, you had to do the buddy system. You had to go to the bathroom with a buddy just in case you got lost or there was some creeper there. Jesus, the best buddy system. Jesus was with them, right? So you shouldn't be scared when Jesus is with you. He had already demonstrated. We're in almost at the end of Mark chapter 4, and Mark has been like an action movie. If there's a book of the Bible that's just boom, 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 action, no. I was going to say no junk. The Bible's not junk. There's no junk in the Bible, but it just moves, man. It just goes through. So if through almost 5 chapters in Mark, they've seen his power demonstrated. They've seen lots of miracles happen. They've seen some really, really cool stuff. So they should know who they're with. And number 3, Jesus wasn't scared. It said he was sleeping on a cushion. He was in the bottom of the boat taking a nap. He was at peace. He was in God's will, and he knew that the Father would take care of him. So it's kind of a reminder. Oftentimes, our problems are not what's going on outside. Oftentimes, our problems that are going on inside of us. And the outside stuff can't be affecting us when we're following the Lord closely. We don't want to aspire to what Jesus said to the disciples in this passage. Do you still have no faith? We rest in the victory that the Lord is in constant control of every single situation. He's going to go to miracle number 2. So miracle number 2 starts in Mark chapter 5. It goes verse 1 through 20. They came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. When he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. And he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain. Because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him, and the shackles broken to pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains and gashing himself with stones. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him. And shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you, by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And he was asking him, "What is your name?" And said to him, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he began to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain. The demons implored him, saying, "Send us into the swine so that we may enter them." Jesus gave them permission, and coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. The herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and in the country, and the people came to see what it was that had happened. They came to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon-possessed, sitting down, clothed, and in the right mind. The very man who had the legion, and they became frightened. Those who had seen it described to them how it had happened to the demon-possessed man and all about the swine. And they began to implore him to leave their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed was imploring him that he might accompany him. And he did not let him, but he said to him, "Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. Jesus and his disciples get through the storm. They land on the other side of the sea, the lake or sea, and they encounter a demon-possessed man. And we see in this encounter 3 different forces at work that we see even today: Satan, society, and the Savior. These forces, we know, are still at work today in our world, trying to control the lives of people, trying to control our lives and the lives of people we know and love. So first, Satan is a thief whose ultimate goal is to destroy. He was talking about the unclean spirits. Mark was writing about the unclean spirits who are just demons. And they can easily get a foothold, Satan can easily get a foothold in lives of people who cultivate sinful practices, sinful behaviors. When we're not doing what we should be doing, there is a foothold. There is somewhere for Satan to step in and invade our life. We should never underestimate the power of Satan. We know God is all-powerful, but we shouldn't underestimate the power that Satan can wreak in our lives when we are not following closely to the Lord. This seems like a very extreme example. It's nothing I've seen. And so while it might be an extreme example, it's a really good reminder to us that we need to resist Satan. The things that are not of God are of Satan. We need to resist those things, and we should have nothing to do with him or the things that are displeasing to the Lord. Another factor that came into play was society. So society, what they knew how to do was say, all right, we're going to isolate these guys. Maybe we're going to imprison them, chain them up. There wasn't a whole lot of help that society could do for these guys. They kept them under guard. And with all the great achievements today, there's some progress, I would assume, in society from then till now. There are still lots of things, all problems, that people cannot cope with outside of God. It needs a Savior. So the cause, Satan, society doesn't know what to do with it, and the only solution is the Savior, which is Jesus. The Savior came generously in to love this man. He was showing love to this man after he had come through a storm. His disciples, being afraid from the storm, this is probably the last thing that they wanted to see. Yet they see Jesus calmly moving from the storm after a long day of explaining the Lord's word through parables and explaining it to the disciples, crossing over to the other side of the shore, and now you got this extremely demon-possessed guy who's crazy. They could see the Lord wasn't worried, wasn't concerned. He was resting in God's faithfulness. Jesus used the same words to calm the sea as he did to cast out the demons. And not only did he come out and speak to the man, but he permitted the man to speak. He actually had a conversation with this man who was possessed. The demons spoke through the man, confessing that they believe Jesus is the Son of God, acknowledging he has authority over them. Don't cast us out. Don't do anything with us. You could see that. The man said he was under control of a legion of demons. A Roman legion in that time consisted of about 6,000 men. So whatever the number was, it was a severely, a guy who was in a lot of trouble that only Jesus could provide a solution for. Satan came to destroy these men, but Jesus came to deliver them. Jesus then, having cast out the spirits into this herd of pigs, who then ran down the cliff into the sea, Jesus then was asked to leave. So everybody heard what happened, and the people in the city said, "You just got to get out of here, man." Instead of kind of appreciating how miraculous this was and having him stay and learning from him and having, maybe he would perform more miracles, they asked him to leave. He, of course, did damage to the local economy with the pigs drowning. I have no idea if this is a right number, but I did look it up on the internet. Pigs back then, 2,000 pigs was $500,000. So $500K. I wouldn't want to lose $500K in a random afternoon because something crazy happened, something miraculous happened. So they were choosing economy over understanding they were in the presence of the Lord. So as one crowd sighed with relief that Jesus was leaving, Jesus left. Another crowd was waiting to welcome him in Capernaum, and they were very excited for that. We'll go to Mark. We'll continue in Mark chapter 5, and we'll just start in verse 21 and go through verse 34, and we'll see how Jesus has victory over disease in Capernaum. When Jesus had crossed over again in the boat to the other side, a large crowd gathered around him, and so he stayed by the seashore. One of the synagogue officials named Jairus came up, and on seeing him, fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Please come and lay your hands on her, so that she will get well and live." And he went off with him, and a large crowd was following him and pressing in on him. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and had endured much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. After hearing about Jesus, she came up in the crowd behind him and touched his cloak. For she thought, "If I just touch his garments, I will get well." Immediately, the flow of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her affliction. Immediately, Jesus, perceiving in himself that the power proceeding from him had gone forth, turned around in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you, and you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see the woman who had done this. But the woman, fearing and trembling, aware of what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction." So 2 people, among many, were especially anxious to see Jesus. Jairus, a man with a dying 12-year-old daughter, and in the Bible, an anonymous woman who had an incurable disease. So the contrast of these 2 needy people is striking in their life situations. And it shows us the wideness of Christ's love and his mercy. Jairus, to many, was an important synagogue officer, and the woman not mentioned was an anonymous nobody to the crowd. Jesus showed them both victory because of their faith, despite how the world would perceive them. As a synagogue worker, Jairus was wealthy, but you know how it goes when you have money. The money can't help you save a very sick child, in this case, a dying child. The other woman had spent all she had with the doctors, but no cure was found. Both Jairus and the woman found answers to their needs at the feet of Jesus. The woman was as down as she possibly could have been. A very tough situation to be sick with no answers in sight. An extended, very, very trying time, 12 years with no answers, and doing everything that you can, spending your last dollar trying to find an answer. She laid aside all of her excuses, and she came by faith to Jesus. That's a victor. That's a person that experiences victory. Even the degree of faith might be questioned. she didn't have enough faith. She just wanted to touch his cloak. She didn't want to talk to him, whatever. You could question even the degree of faith, but she made the attempt for victory that she could. She had the faith that she could at that point. Not everyone has the same degree of faith in all situations, but Jesus responds to all faith, no matter the measure. Jesus understands the faith that someone is showing and someone has. There were many other people in the crowd. We were mentioning 2 people. You saw the disciples said, "You mean who touched you? Everybody's touching you. We're in a big crowd." There were a lot of other people that didn't show the faith that this woman showed and that Jairus is going to show. The Lord's words to the woman about faith and peace must have encouraged Jairus. Imagine his emotions as he's trying to hurry and get to Jesus because he knows his daughter's dying. He's then trying to hurry and have Jesus come to his house as fast as possible, and he can't because Jesus is, picture a concert. You're in the mosh pit of a concert. You gotta wiggle your way out. And he's moving slowly. And other people are asking for Jesus' time and his attention. And this woman, who he might say, okay, you have a disease, it might be incurable, but you're still alive. My daughter's going to die if you don't get there soon. Imagine his emotions as he's seeing this as well. The Lord's word about faith and peace must have encouraged Jairus as he was going through that time as well, as much as being impressed that Jesus had healed the woman. We'll continue on to miracle number 4, centered on the work that's done with Jairus and his daughter, and it shows us the Lord's victory over death. So in Mark 5, continuing on in verse 35, going to the end of the chapter, verse 43, Mark writes, "While he was still speaking, they came from the house of the synagogue official saying, 'Your daughter has died. Why trouble the teacher anymore?' But Jesus, overhearing what was being spoken, said to the synagogue official, 'Do not be afraid any longer, only believe.' And he allowed no one to accompany him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the synagogue official, and he saw a commotion, people loudly weeping and wailing. And entering in, he said to them, 'Why make a commotion and weep? The child has not died, but is asleep.' They began laughing at him. But putting them all out, he took along the child's father and mother and his own companions and entered the room where the child was. Taking the child by the hand, he said to her, 'Talitha cum,' which translated means, 'Little girl, I say to you, get up.' Immediately, the girl got up and began to walk, for she was 12 years old. And immediately they were completely astounded. And he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this. And he said that something should be given to her to eat." So this encouragement that we talked about to Jairus was completely necessary, given the news that he's going to hear. Also thinking about Jairus, it probably was not easy for him to come out publicly and look for Jesus and seek Jesus' help. As a synagogue official, he was a member of kind of a group that probably didn't have great feelings about Jesus. Religious leaders were firmly opposed to Jesus at that point. The things that Jesus had taught in the synagogue aroused the anger of the leaders, and some of those leaders might even been friends, acquaintances of Jairus. So he took a risk. He stepped out in faith to come and seek Jesus' help with his daughter. In this situation, we talked about our words this morning in Bible training, right, when we're going through Colossians, and the title of that chapter was Talk Isn't Cheap. Talk's not cheap. And we talked about words and how they can be very beneficial to ourselves and to others when used in the way the Lord has directed us to use them. So we'll talk about the words of Jesus, 3 different things that he said to Jairus. First, he gave him a word of faith. Be not afraid, go on believing, is the literal translation of what Jesus said after Jairus' friends reported that his daughter was dead. Jesus said, in other words, you had some degree of faith when you came to me, and your faith has helped. And your faith was helped when he healed the woman, when Jesus healed the woman. He came with some degree of faith to Jesus to start. When he saw what happened with the woman, how could that not have exponentially compounded? His faith had to grow, seeing what Jesus had done. Don't quit. Keep believing. It was easier to have faith, of course, when his daughter was still alive.